Welcome to a special edition of Watching Washington. I'm Ellie Acra, and it's Monday, April 24th. Today, we are joined by U.S. Senator Todd Young of Indiana. Senator Young was re-elected to the Senate last November for his second term in office. Welcome, Senator Young.
Thanks for having me, Ellie.
We're excited to have you. So, as we get started in this interview, we know that you were in the Marines, you worked with our former Purdue president, Mitch Daniels, and in his governor administration. So could you give us a little bit more about your background and what got you interested in running for Senate?
Graduated from the Naval Academy after up here in the Hoosier State, and as you say, spent some time in the Marine Corps. And then when I left the Marines, I did a brief stint, about a year and a half, in Senator Lugar's office in Washington, followed by a job at a management consultancy here in Indiana for a number of years. Went to law school at night and really enjoyed that, but I decided to run for office in 2009, thinking I had something to offer. I had a young family at the time, and it was important to me that my kids grew up in as good a place, perhaps even a better place than I did. And I thought I could do my part to help make that happen.
So now that we're into your legislative career, you've become the face of the well-known CHIPS and Science Act. That was born out of the Endless Frontier Act, with our intentions to compete with China on technology that is vital to our national security. So how did your work in this evolve into the CHIPS Act as we know it today?
It's sort of a fun story. It actually began in the Senate gym. That's where I got to know Senator Schumer a bit. And we would, from time to time, in addition to just kind of exchanging, hellos, we talk about our shared interests. There aren't a lot. But one of them was in foreign policy and particularly making sure that we win this generational challenge against China. So we decided to work together on some important legislation. Originally, it was called the Endless Frontier Act. That was back in about 2019. And then over a period of a couple of years, it evolved into what is now the CHIPS and Science Act. And so we're in the process of implementing it. But in short, this is legislation that's focused on enhancing our national security, but also our economic security, so that the next time there's a global pandemic that interrupts our supply chains, or God forbid, a geopolitical event like the Chinese Communist Party trying to seize Taiwan, we'll be more prepared for those sorts of contingencies.
So as we talk about the implementation, we look at Skywater and Purdue's commitment to semiconductor manufacturing and research, which has been a big win for the Purdue community and the state of Indiana. So how do you see the CHIPS and Science Act continuing to benefit the economy right here in our state?
Skywater is a big deal. It's not just a big deal in terms of the direct jobs that are associated with that, although we are going to make sure they continue to grow. But it also, it's important to have the right sort of ecosystem of businesses and talent across a state. And this will help increase maybe the quality of jobs or the type of jobs that we have, so that we can attract more of those high-tech jobs in the future. But there are a couple of things that I think will increasingly be discussed as it relates to the CHIPS and Science Act, and then relate directly to semiconductors. One is training. So much of this legislation invests in our people and ensures that they have the requisite skills to fill those kind of next generation technology jobs, whether it's in semiconductors or hypersonics or artificial intelligence, quantum computing. There are a lot of areas where we target investments in this particular act. Another is the Tech Hub program. This is a provision in the legislation to allow certain regions of our different states to apply to be federally designated as a tech hub. Indiana is actually in the process of preparing 3 different applications in the hope that we can land one. But if Indiana were to become, for example, the ag informatics tech hub in the country, that would lead to all sorts of private investment, additional incentives to create small businesses, which hopefully would become large businesses in that area, and ensure that Indiana remains not just a great place to visit, but also a great place to stay if you grow up here, so that you can start a family and become prosperous.
So as we continue thinking about the CHIPS Act and its implementation, we also know that you're doing a lot of work with our president here at Purdue, President Chang, and actually met in DC for a summit on semiconductor manufacturing last week. He was also your guest at the State of the Union, but you're an IU grad. So we wanted to know if your allegiance has changed or if you could seriously tell us about your relationship with President Chang.
Well, I do have an IU diploma and proud of it, IU Law School. But usually I get a pass on that because I'm a Naval Academy grad, and so for undergrad, that's sort of a neutral institution. But yeah, my wife is a Purdue grad, so I think we have our bases covered there. But in all seriousness, Mung has been a great leader at Purdue for some period of time, before he became president. And also as the Secretary of State's point person on science and technology issues during the Trump administration. And he and I got to know one another a bit during that period of time. I think he is poised to take Purdue University even to the next level, even though it's doing amazingly on so many fronts right now. And I will say he was one of the early supporters of the CHIPS and Science Act. He sees benefit not just to Purdue and to the greater Lafayette community, but really to the entire state of Indiana and to our country as we defend our very way of life and our value system against an increasingly hostile Chinese Communist Party.
That's great to hear, and fun to hear a little more insight on that friendship and relationship. We're excited that we have that relationship with the Senator's office here at Purdue. So let's touch now on affordable housing. If you ask just about any student here at Purdue, finding affordable housing is quite the task. And it seems to be the same across the country. So what are you doing in the Senate to help fix this issue?
Really, it's a very interesting issue in the sense that I didn't run for United States Senate thinking that housing affordability would be a major issue. It's not the sort of thing that is often discussed in my political circles, but I did run to solve like real world problems and to address those sorts of challenges that I was hearing from rank and file Hoosiers. And this was, as I traveled around the state, if not the number one issue, certainly among the top few issues I kept hearing about. And so I started to think, is there a federal role? And for a long period of time, there have been some various housing programs, and they've had mixed success to ensure that, everyday Americans can afford housing. They're being squeezed out of the market increasingly because of government regulations, and I have a bill to help address that because we have some longstanding programs that could work a little bit better, and I have a bill to address that. And there are even some challenges with respect to in ensuring that historically discriminatory land use policies and regulatory policies are taken off the books. And so I have another bill to do that. I do think this is one of those issues that really crosses party lines, and it's the sort of thing that in a time of divided government, even at a time as we head into a presidential election cycle, that you might see some forward movement on in coming months.
Awesome. And speaking of divided government, our country does have major issues to solve, like affordable housing, as we just discussed, gun violence, the economy, but Congress is very divided, as you said. So you've crossed the aisle multiple times, like with the CHIPS Act and Respect for Marriage Act. Are you seeing common ground on some of these issues in your discussions with other lawmakers? And do you think anything will happen this year?
I'm seeing common ground. Congress, for example, has not legally ended a war. We've started several, but we've not legally ended a war by repealing an authorization for the use of military force since the end of the Vietnam War. And so we've had several military authorizations that remain on the books. I have led an effort, along with Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, to repeal the Iraq War authorization. So there was one in 1991 and another in 2002. And there's much talk today, as there has been in recent years, about bringing to an end these forever wars. And I actually think that we do need to take those sorts of things seriously. But Congress is really the institution that should be doing that. The President of the United States is supposed to execute the military force, but Congress will initiate that by declaring war or authorizing force, overseeing the operation of the military operation, and then later ending it. So we just passed out of the Senate in basically a 2-to-1 margin, authorization repeal. It's going to the House of Representatives, and the president's already indicated that if the House can pass it, he will sign it into law. So it's a big deal. The American Legion is full-throatedly behind this effort, sends a good message to our veterans and to the American people that this is going to be a first-order priority for us going forward.
Yeah, that's one area where it's great to see the common ground in Congress working together on that legislation. So could you speak also about the latest Pentagon leak? How damaging was this leak to our national security? This is something that we've reported on our show, but haven't had much insight about, so we wanted to hear your thoughts.
You know, I have been briefed on this in a classified setting recently. Suffice it to say that it's very damaging. It's damaging because of the information that was leaked and how that can reveal sources and methods as we try and collect intelligence in the future. It's damaging to our relations with our friends around the world when they read that the United States is, as we must do in certain circumstances, been collecting information on their countries. That, of course, creates a lot of stress and strain in relationships that we're trying to maintain and nurture. I think that, you know, to be constructive about this, how do we prevent this sort of thing from happening in the future? And I think we really need to focus on the number of top secret clearances that are given to different people, people seemingly with very minor responsibilities within our military chain of command, or people who are defense contractors on a single project. We need to revisit that, do so quickly, and we also need to hold accountable those who didn't make the proper changes in those sorts of policies after the Snowden leak. This has happened too many times in recent years, and it just can't keep happening.
Now for our most pressing question of all, tell us about your role as custodian of the Senate Candy Desk, and how did you land that sweet gig?
A hard question as we approach the very end, but I'd known about the Candy Desk. When you spend just a short bit of time in the Senate, you see. I think there's an exception to eating on the floor, and it's when you get candies from the Candy Desk. So you're sort of wondering where people get it. And it was Pat Toomey. Pat Toomey was the U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania, home of Hershey chocolate. And I knew Pat was retiring. I also knew that as I've traveled around the state over the years, I visited a lot of amazing candy shops like Shemp's Confectionery down in the Jeffersonville area, or South Bend Chocolate up north, or Endangered Species Chocolate downtown here in Indianapolis. And I knew that Indiana, deserved this opportunity. And so what I did was I lobbied one of the young people in the cloakroom who was in charge of getting people's desk requests. And I told him not to draw too much attention to the Candy Desk and to kind of hold it aside for me. And no one took it, surprisingly. And so I am carrying on the great American tradition. The last time we had a U.S. senator that assumed the candy desk, I guess it was in the early 80s, Senator Lugar headed for a period of time. And I've already had a number of my colleagues. Ted Cruz went over to the candy desk the other day and grabbed some of our chocolate. He seemed to approve. So it'll be fun to report back about some of the candy desk experiences in the future.
We'll be on the lookout for that. Well, thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate it. And we've had a great conversation, and I'm sure the students of Purdue and beyond will love to hear it. Thank you for watching today's special edition of Watching Washington. We will see you next fall.